Hello, welcome back. This is Human Design for Parents and Educators, and I am your host, Sasha Clark, and I have with me my co-host, my partner in education, Jessica Ann, and she is actually our resident 1-3 in the wild, in the live on stage for you today. We are going to be talking about the 1-3 profile and its trajectory in the lifetime of the child. And Jess is going to be sharing some personal information about being a 1-3, but also she's got a wealth of information about the 1-3 trajectory. So this is what you can expect in this episode. Stay tuned because we're going to be talking about the basically the 1-3 is like a brilliant scientists in their life, and they go through this period of deep research and then experimentation. It's the only profile line that has both the subconscious and conscious on the lower part of the trigram, which is fascinating in itself. But we'll talk about why that's important also in this episode. So stay tuned with us. We're really excited you're here. Okay, like I said, I'm your host, Sasha Clark, and this is Jess. The highest realization of potential for a 1-3 really is to have that freedom and just that innate, to go with an innate drive to do a deep dive on whatever's catching their fancy at the moment, and then have the space and permission to go into the experimental phase of the line 3 and really just try out. I mean, sometimes we go into trial and error and we disprove our own hypothesis, which is perfectly acceptable to the 1-3. In fact, that's actually excites them. And whereas other line 3 with other juxtapositions kind of that could feel frustrating, but for the 1-3 it's like, oh good, I learned something that didn't work, so that's cool. I was wondering if that was going to work or not. Now I know, so it's a really brilliant trajectory. And the highest expression is really to become a master either in a specialized field or whatever topic, not to say that they're going to pick one career for their whole life, but whatever they're currently focused on, they'll become a master in that subject. And I find that to be really true with my 1-3 son. Jess, do you want to, let's talk about, I mean, you really were, are like the embodiment of 1-3. You have had several different phases or focuses throughout your life. Let's talk a bit about how that expression of the research leads into the experimentation and that relationship between the two beautiful energies in your profile.
Well, I would love to just add as well that the highest trajectory of a 1-3 child, including myself, is to become the authority. And it's really important for us to grasp that this is about deeply understanding the foundations of a subject area and then having through our trial and error process across domains, and we will look at what you said, my different ways this is expressed across my life to be able to have or ignite an evolutionary pioneering transformation. So really, you're looking at the 1-3 and going, what new, what innovation, what pioneering ideas are you going to bring humanity through your years of experience, subject knowledge, expertise, and depth? And through that embodied wisdom that you've gained about what works and what doesn't, what are you coming to share? And it really is about innovation.
Yeah, and I think that it's surprising to parents of a 1-3 because they do have a real intrapersonal energy. So it feels like they're just kind of in their own island studying something, like exhausting all of the resources about that subject. And then so there's a ditch I think parents can get into where they're like, I don't know, this kid just likes to study. I like, it's hard to see beyond that, where it's innovating. Like, it's really, you're right, the energy is really to help set a new foundation for all of the collective. But it doesn't seem like an outward focused energy when they're in that study zone. It seems very intrapersonal or almost introverted, really. So it's really fascinating. I agree with you. When they do finally shine in the highest vibration, they are major game changers in any team or any group, a family or a society. They're major game changers because they have a foundation to stand on. They're very confident about what works and what doesn't work, and it's very difficult, I've found, to argue with. Like, if this just happened actually yesterday, we were traveling and I don't know what we were talking about, but it was one of my 1-3 son's subject matters that he's very in depth about. And I tried to argue with him, like, I don't think that's right. And one of my other sons said, "Are you even trying to argue with him about that subject? Like, he is totally the master of that subject. I can't even believe you're trying to argue with him." And so I Googled it, and turns out he was right. I mean, it's totally true. Like, he really is the authority on the certain subjects he's mastered already.
And it's really important to understand that this is their highest potential. And if that 1-3 doesn't get a solid grounded education, if they don't get to have the time to study something in depth and build that mastery, they are going to be on shaky ground. And this really can show up as a deep, deep internal sense of inadequacy, a deep
Right.
sense of not knowing enough and not wanting to go out and experiment. And so because if that 1-3 person doesn't get the knowledge or doesn't have the education for whatever reason in life, they are going to suffer because they're not that's because they're always going to have that internal fit, that internal um, fear.
It's like a hesitancy or an apprehension, right? It's like,
Yeah,
I can't step forward in my natural authority role because I don't have that foundation to stand on that brings me that confidence. So
yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned time. I want to go there first. Like, I feel like, if we're going to compare them, I don't like to compare children, but let's compare them to other profile lines. These kids really need a little more, like, they really need a lot of time to study. Like, maybe even a little less there's a new trend in the parenting circles about, are there too many extracurriculars in your child's life? And we used to joke around when my oldest was young that we were like the little house on the freeway because we were constantly driving to one thing or another. But for these kids especially, I wouldn't say that necessarily about 2 4s, or maybe even, some of the fifth lines, but for 1 3s, I do think they need time to study. They need some time to really dig into their subject matter, whether that means time every day or just, like you said, giving them access to courses that could really help them continue to study the things they're super interested in. What else would you say about that in terms of, like, how can we nurture the education of a line one?
Well, firstly, just to pick up on the point that you said about time, I think it's really important to recognize that when we look at profile, we're looking at relational characteristics as well. What helps that grounds that and nurtures that human being. And
Mhm.
not only do we need time to develop mastery, to go deep and tinker and come back and etc., we need time alone. Like, we're not the most sociable people. We can go out, and of course, when we look at a child's whole chart, we're not going to take just the profile in isolation. We're going to look at
Right.
everything synthesis. But I know a lot of 1-3s, and I've had this with a client. I've used this example before, where my 1-3 client said to me, "I notice that I feel really like I don't want to go out. I don't want to go out every day with my husband or my boyfriend. I don't want to go to all these social events, but it's really lame if I don't." And so she's been deeply conditioned to believe that being out there, being sociable, not having that time and space to be inward, introspective, and reflective, which is how we make sense of the world, it's
Right.
how we learn. Um, she's not getting that nourishment, she's not getting that grounded. So it's not even just about not filling them up with, and again, depending on their type, are they a projector, are they reflector, blah blah blah,
Right.
not just pumping them with a variety of different things, but allowing them to not be sociable, to not go out every day and do something. So, if and speak to the child. Really, all of this is about empowering them to have a sense of their own knowing and a sense of their own sovereignty and a
Mhm.
sense of themselves. So, communication. We want you to use the profiles as a tool to open up their awareness to their natural way of being. So it's not about us imposing, do this, don't do
Right.
that. Have a
Right.
conversation. Here's the knowledge. How do you feel about this? What's your
Yeah.
take on your authority saying? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you. My coffee must be kicking in. I but no, I really honor that. And that's really from the parenting aspect too. Like, again, I think this is like attuning ourselves to their own natural rhythm rather than trying to impose our rhythm or what we think their rhythm should be onto them, and kind of embracing it that way. I've even found that my 1 3 son studies people before he decides to engage in a friendship or a deeper friendship, close friendship. He hasn't really gotten into romantic relationships yet. but he studies people. I mean, so he's doing the same 1-3 process with people as that he does with subject matter. He's just like, I think I want to be friends with that person. We have a lot in common. So I'm going to be in a community circle where I can get to know that person a little better, study them a little bit. Because one of his, deal breakers, he doesn't want to waste time being friends with people that aren't kind. So he's really just looking to see, are you actually who that's kind of the experimental phase. Here's what I think I know about you. Now I need to get to know you a little better. And as a parent, a couple years ago, I was starting to worry that he was so introverted that he was not socializing enough. And so I'm just being honest because I'm sure other parents are worried about their 1-3s too. And he legitimately, like, the amount of time he needs to be with people is a lot less than my all of my other kids. But the interactions he has with people tend to seem to be in group situations until he really gets to know that one person he's kind of reading about, so to speak. He's
Mm.
reading their character, reading their personality, and then he will go reach out and go, hey, do you want to hang out and play Pokemon sometime or whatever. And he doesn't initiate a whole lot of things either. He's a generator, so he's really good at just waiting to respond. Which, anyway, we should talk about that more in another episode. These different profiles kind of wear a little different on all of the different aura types, but back to I just wanted to piggyback on your relationship comment that they're not necessarily interested in socializing all the time, but when they do have something to say, they want to, yeah, and when they do have something to share, they want to have people to share it with. So as a parent and an educator, really becoming that person that's willing to listen to any of the things they've been studying about, because sometimes they have like a, I don't know, 10-minute monologue about it. And I'm honored to be that person because he needs to share it with someone he trusts. And he's not going to just call a buddy on the phone and talk for 10 minutes straight about some animal he's super curious about right now, because he knows socially that might be kind of distressing, but I'm glad he can do it with me or with one of his brothers.
Mm.
Um, which reminded me when you were talking about the education of a 1-3, how important it is to really give them be kind of a cheerleader for whatever they're excited about. And you don't always have to direct what they're learning because they are very independent students, but just being that person that can kind of, I guess I wouldn't call it soundboarding, but kind of like share their excitement about a new discovery or share their new innovative idea that they think might work, but they got to go test it out now. And there's a lot of excitement around some of those things, right? So yeah, I guess what would you say if trying to put yourself in the mind of parents, what would you say would be like two of the most helpful tips to help a 1-3 be really masterful over a subject matter, especially when that parent maybe doesn't know much about the subject at all? That's when the anxiety about being the parent in that situation is the highest.
Well, first, I think I just want to begin by going back to how do we really nurture the mind of, or how do
Yeah.
we nurture them anyway? And we'll come back to the two things. So, firstly, we really want to develop their scholarship skills. We want to teach them practical note making strategies, give them allow them to be asking questions, pose questions, develop a culture of learning and a spirit of inquiry in the house. And and seek out teachers that really help them to think critically and not to take things at face value. The third line child is going to want to challenge authority. It's going to challenge what if it doesn't hold up. That might be the kid who asked the teacher the question, and because they're genuinely like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And
Mm-hmm.
if that teacher's not open to, hasn't created a culture of learning in the class, or was a bit tired that day, and it shuts down that child, that's not helpful. What we want is to really create that space for them to challenge because they are seeking to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah,
So,
totally. And if you wanted little, for the listeners, if you want a little more of a deep dive about that, our episode about 6-2s, we talked a lot about dialectic questioning and the different stages that kids go through as they're mastering information. So go check that episode out. But anyway, I won't interrupt you any longer.
fine. And so I would also say the third line is really, we call it the theme of trial and error. So teaching them how to embrace failure and not make mistakes a big thing. And I saw a beautiful example of this with my brother raising his 2-year-old the other day. He's very, very calm. He's very, very relaxed. The 2-year-old, they took him out and he's potty training. So the little boy did a pee on the floor, and he literally, I was on the phone, that's why, so I noticed it. And the boys are 5'2", so it's not a third line, but my brother is a third line.
Mm,
He's learned this for himself the hard way, right?
right.
So 5. So the baby looked down, he looked shamed, even though he's only 2. So, and Nishmi was like, hey, that's fine, no problem. We're gonna go to the car. And there was no, oh no, what have you done? Oh,
Right.
and so he's already ingraining inculcating the idea that we fail forward, we make a mistake, no big deal. There's no nervous system dysregulation over here. So
Right.
training them to actually embrace failure. And like we started off with this science motif, scientists, we're actually here to consciously make mistakes. That's how we get answers. We pose hypotheses, check it out, didn't work, no big deal. And so really not allowing them to internalize shame, big thing for parents, big thing for educators.
Absolutely. And really, like, I totally endorse, I mean, not just for the 1-3, I think all kids could benefit from really celebrating that culture of curiosity rather than there's only one way to think about this or there's only one process to go through to get to this answer. I definitely think that's the new wave of the educational paradigm. It's really cultivating curiosity in everything that we're doing.
And I also think this is something that's really coming very strong through this bonds made and bonds broken theme. It's not always about burning bridges. It's not as dramatic as people can perceive it if they don't understand this idea. I think it's important to allow them to break bonds. You don't have to read the whole book. You don't have to stay committed to this one thing. Let them walk away if it doesn't
Mm.
feel good. Not you started gymnastics, you have to finish gymnastics.
Yeah, true. True.
Break the bond.
And I've also thought about how we can harness, like for example, if you're going to be going on a trip to a new place and your 1-3 child is going with you, you can start to seed the curiosity before the trip with some books about that place or about a monument you're going to see while you're there or some history that has to do with being there. And that way you're kind of teasing the curiosity before the event, because they do need to feel like they're standing on a foundation of information at least, or expectations, in order to try something new. And so I definitely think we can kind of embrace that by YouTube videos or whatever, something to help start getting their mind prepared, I think, or for what to expect in the next stage or when you're on vacation or whatever.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And it's really interesting for me because when I've read about that, that wasn't something that I've ever. It shows up for me differently in like needing a solid foundation to create from. But
Sure.
I love adventure. I love not knowing. I love spontaneity, and I think that's the third line. But I've also got other things in my chart.
Right.
But I do like having a place that I can have my books, my
Yeah.
paper. I'm gonna work in this thing. So having a space that they can work and create, if that's possible, and it's not going to be possible for everybody. But one of the top tips would be um, develop reflective practice or a metacognitive approach to everything. So not just giving them facts, giving them information. Where have I learned this before? Where does this connect to something else that I know? Bridge the learning. What have I learned about this, and how will I use it elsewhere? So you're constantly getting them to work with knowledge and information and bridge that work with it in a very metacognitive way.
Sure.
Powerful tool.
Yeah, I also like to use that when I'm coaching a 1-3, also other profile lines, but about like when they're feeling frustrated about failure, going back to like, okay, wait a minute, you've addressed challenging information before. What did you use that time that helped you have your breakthrough? Let's go back and see. Maybe there's a tool that you had used that time that you forgot about, haven't used this time. Why isn't it working? What's broken? Rather than it's broken, I'm done, I can't figure this out. So just helping them use the tools of learning in their favor. And I can't stress enough how, like, I think failure should be the new F word. I don't even think it's like, it's just not, and I hate to use the word should too, because that's on my F word list too, um but like the word failure sounds very final, and there's nothing is really final for the 1-3. We're always They're always looking to see how can this be tweaked or improved. Is this the final answer? What else am I missing? You know, there's a real cognitive process going on all the time in reanalyzing what we think we know and learning new nuances to that subject.
Yes, they are a tinkerer. They like to go back
That's a good word.
over things. But there was something else I was thinking about a minute ago, which could be really great practice. The one thing about the 1-3 is they like a solid foundation, and we hate kind of bits of information out of context that don't make any sense, you know. And that is, if you want to be a really high level educator and you want to create powerful learning opportunities, what could be good is to have a not, if you're not explicitly teaching research skills, you know, the skills of like annotating and finding, collating evidence and data from science or English or even maths, have knowledge organizers. What are the core concepts that that kid needs to know to be successful over the term or even
Mm,
over the year? Have that organized at the start so they can, oh, okay, core concept, core knowledge. So that, you know, what, so they can use the information in more complex ways rather than trying to dig deep and find how it all makes sense. The one
mm,
line, when I give a reading to a one line, I like to give them depth. I like to give them the whole and show how everything, like, so yesterday I did my first session in my 5-week course of the HD Lab, the Human
mhm.
Design Lab. And actually, she turns out to be a 1-3 manifester. But I
Not
wanted,
surprised because we're recording this episode today.
yeah, right. And I wanted, so what I did for the first session was the anatomy of a chart. So we're
Mm,
going through, so you get the vocabulary and the language. So you know from the beginning, we're setting that context. This is a gate, this is a line, this is a channel, this is a so that when we go forward and we take the chart apart and we're only focusing on type, you still have the whole
yeah.
for it to make sense. And that is really important for a one-line learner.
It is. I remember my 1-3 is really fascinated with animals, and he was memorizing genus and species in the first grade. Like he loves, like you said, he loves anything that can kind of give him categories to now file the things he's learning under. And so you can kind of harness that researcher in him by giving, like helping him memorize I kind of see it as like memorizing the outline of something. And then as he's learning, he's like, oh, that fits over here and that fits over here, and now I see how it fits together and I can build relationships between those data points. Otherwise, like you said, it's just a big pile of papers in their head that's not filed anywhere. And it becomes really tedious to sort through it every time they're looking for something, if you know what I mean, like to reference it later. So yeah, we do kind of set up a system of like, here's how how you can a good relationship for this information before we even get started, and then go into the specifics, the details, and then they're a lot more likely to retain that as one whole big schema then, which is what we want. I guess just to kind of nerd out for a little bit, which is totally typical of us when we're talking about 1-3. Like there is anytime we can create a way for their brain to categorize a schema of information together, and this is true for all the types. It's just like the brain spends a lot of time sorting through information, but if it has a built-in schema that it can just pull up the whole thing, it's a lot faster, it's a lot more efficient for the brain. And so anytime you can help them kind of make connections, and some of like what we've talked about in the last episode, some of that happens through the dialectical questioning, which is why it's so important as educators for all the types, but especially for the 1-3s, to really embrace the more challenging questions and not be afraid to even be wrong. And I guess I'm not saying that maybe the information you're working off of is wrong, but like to be able to say, okay, I might be wrong, let's talk about that, and not take it as kind of a personal offense, and allow that conversation to really come forward, because you and the student especially will learn so much from the questions, and you'll really learn where that student's at from the questions they're asking. And it's just very typical when they're become 9 or 10 or 11 to have lots of questions, and the system kind of shuts it down, so we can really help that by being dialectical with them.
Yeah. Just something that's popped into my head as well is if we also think about the 1-3, we are here to be self-providers. So we are here to be sustainable on our own. And you could say we are pretty entrepreneurial. So if you notice that in your young person, develop that and let them, develop those entrepreneurial skills, those kind of skills, because they might work in faculty, they might work at the head of thing, they might lead something, who knows? They might be in a band. There's lots of famous, I think Ringo Starr was a 1-3. So it's not necessarily just intellectual academic stuff, but they're not really here to work for somebody else.
Right, right. Yeah, I definitely see that in my 1-3. He's had a lemonade stand. He has a dog sitting business. He's pretty entrepreneurial. And
Book and
he had
Amazon.
yeah, last year the kids all decided to ask their dog sitting client for a raise. And I was really surprised because he's so introverted that he decided to take the helm, the leadership, and advocate for the raise for all three of them. And I was like, it was amazing. He came to the conversation. He actually asked me for some advice. We talked about, well, here's what people are looking for before they give you a raise, and so he did his research, and then he went in and he's like, well, we'll see if this works. My mom might be right, she might not, I don't know. We'll try it though. The worst thing that could happen is they say no, I'm still getting paid to babysit their dog.
That's
So
fantastic. Yeah.
go,
No,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you picked up again something else that's really important. That never, not never, but it's really uncomfortable for a one-line person to be put on the spot. They like to know, that does show up a lot. So this, because when I've read about this, things like, oh, they really like to be secure, they like to be certain about certain, like going on holiday and like what they're going to do. That for me, it wasn't in that way, and I've read about that, but it is things like, if I go to an interview, I want to know what to prepare. I want to know what class I'm teaching. I have been to interviews where they've just changed it and I'm teaching something else that I've not prepared. I've done it. I didn't like it. It's
Yeah.
not fun. It's not good. It's not comfortable for me. And unless you get to a real level of mastery, which I did in education, where I
Mhm.
could just turn up and it's all there and I can just pluck it all out and respond and go. But on that general scale, giving him the books to go and research, writing a pitch, the things you need to include, the things you want
Mhm.
to talk about. That's going to give them such a different energy to go into a situation
Right.
feeling confident.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about like what is your client need? What do they need to know about the value you're contributing to this situation, to this arrangement, to justify why you need more money. Like it wasn't just like I need more money because I'm trying to save up for a new aquarium. Like that's not motivating for them, that's motivating for you. I mean, it was really kind of a yeah, I don't know, maybe it was a little manipulative of me, but anyway, I know he needs to have like a mindset or so a base amount of information. I know we keep saying like they have to know so much, but it isn't that he's not willing to take risks. I think because he was initiating the risk in the first place. I'm going to ask for a raise. That's a risk in and of itself. So he's not adverse to risk. 1-3s are not adverse to risk, but like you said, it's helpful then for them to kind of do a reconnaissance, like what am I actually getting myself into? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that because some of us, especially me in my first phase of the 6-3, the 6-2, I'll often jumped in the deep end without even knowing how to swim, and then I made the best of it. So I definitely don't see 1-3s willing to jump in the deep end not knowing how to swim proverbially, but they will go, okay, I'm going to jump in the deep end. Now I'm going to go stand by the deep end and check it out for a few minutes before I go up the ladder. And once I get up the ladder, I'm going to scan it out too. Like there's a stage, and they're really doing a lot of, I would call it reconnaissance before they jump in and decide and take action. And that's the kind of foundation we need to allow time for them to do as much as they need to. Not all trips have needed a base amount of information, but I always make sure we a few months before to go, hey, do you guys want to go to the library and check out some information about this particular place we're going? I mean, if he's already feels like he knows enough, he'll just say no. It's not a big deal. But I think I'm really more just encouraging, like give the time, give the space, give the reminder, and help. That's such a projector thing of me to say too, but to help guide that process, because they don't always know what's coming down the schedule either. Another thing, here's another example, and this could be partly because he has the gate 57, the gate of the now. He doesn't like talking about the future very much. So whenever we talk about like college aspirations, because he's starting junior high, and in this in our educational system, sometimes it's nice to know where we're going so we can kind of tailor the high school experience to that. And It's not super important. I mean, really, he needs to learn the skills of learning, right? The how to be a researcher, how to annotate information, how to sort data and find the main points. But he doesn't like to talk about the future. And so some of what we're going to do to help him feel less scared about that is take him on campus tours, take him, before he has to make this, long before he has to make a decision, becoming familiar with what that next stage of life might look like. So it doesn't feel scary when we start having to talk about it for real. So, um, okay, so let's talk about the entrepreneurship thing a little more too, because you are an entrepreneur, and that is actually a very something Ra has said a lot is about the anarchist, and is kind of a low vibration of that feeling, but really it kind of comes with it's not that do you feel like 1-3s can't have a boss, or is it more like they just prefer not to? Tell me more about what that's like for parents, especially for parents, because like we like to be the authority in our house sometimes. What is that? What do you think that that energy works like? How can we harness that into harmony so it's not so contentious?
So the anarchy really is about the role of the third line to innovate and to evolve and mutate. So it's not anarchy in the sense of how the word is used in a dictionary of just fighting for fighting's sake.
Sure.
It's about seeing an injustice in the world that they can see is not right and challenging that. So it's not, I wouldn't call it, a low vibration. I think it's it's like anger,
Yeah.
anger is transformational force. If we've been conditioned to believe that anger is wrong, we're not going to have the transformation that it's actually the whole point of the emotion is that it's there so that something can change, something can shift.
Right.
So the anarchist or the martyr is the one who says this thing isn't working anymore, and that's the point where they start the mutative process. They start the evolution. Without the third line, you're not going to see evolution. You're going to see, so it's a very important role that they play. So in terms of, now, I'm not a parent. I'm not going to give parenting advice. I'm a teacher. What
Right.
I taught and what I will teach and what I will teach conscious parents when they come into the self-actualized education programs and things like that is we need to develop self-empowerment. We need to develop emotional intelligence. We need to develop the ability to communicate our needs. And that takes a parent surrendering ego and their trauma and opening up to emotional intelligence and conscious communication and setting boundaries. Every child needs boundaries, but it's about how do we do that? How do we do it in a respectful way? If they're a generator, are we asking them yes, no questions? Are we
Right.
saying, here's the consequences, here's why we're doing this? Here's our roles and responsibilities. How are we going to work within that parameter? And by creating, and that's what I did in education in my final years before I left, I created a culture in a school where it was rooted in the 7 habits of highly successful people. So the classroom culture, the school culture, the ethos was that we were developing a clear set of shared values that were communicated, that the children understood. They understood their role in it, and you can do the same at home. You can create. Okay, well, this is the expectation. This is why we have this, and let's agree it. And it's not to say you're giving away your power to a child, but this is a new way that you can actually create responsibility, self leadership, mutual reciprocity. It's a very powerful way of creating an empowered human being who could then goes out into the world and is able to ask for their needs to be met, is able to negotiate, is able to understand why things are there and not just rail against it. I think that's really powerful because the third line, if they see hypocrisy in an adult, they're not going to respect you. They're going to say, and it doesn't matter if you're the
Right.
mother, father, whoever. That's why it's important to create and model those kind of practices so that that third line will not martyr you. And that's where the anarchist comes in. But no,
Absolutely.
I kind of mean that in jest. But
No, and I really want to, because you said I'm not a parent, but that was such a wise thing that you shared. And again, I just props to you. You are definitely a master in understanding how this energy works, especially in the dynamic between a person who's an authority figure, like a teacher, and the child as a student or a child. I know. And when we talk about parenting education, I'm always like, but parents are educators. Like, I think parents don't, I think they sell themselves short a little bit. Like, who taught them how to feed themselves? You did. Who taught them how to, potty train or whatever? I mean, all of these, and then the emotional skills you're teaching with boundaries and all that. But something really important you said was about not giving up power. So I really wanted to say, like, that's partly why we need to know our own energy and our own human design, because it is easy when we start delving in and focusing on what the child needs to kind of forget that we need to listen to our own intuition and our own inner authority and our own relationship with source about what is needed next. And so we can kind of almost turn human design into a dogma too if we're not careful. And I'm especially saying that about the 1-3 because because this dynamic is really easy to fall into with the 1-3 child, because they'd love to take over and be the authority in your house anyway, because it is their gifting. It's part of, like, I know enough about this that, again, so we kind of, in our home, we kind of harness that around, I do believe you're a master on the subject of tigers, so I will defer this conversation with the other children to you. And whenever, like, one of his younger brothers asked me an animal question, I would say, your brother's actually an expert on that. What, maybe you could ask him. I could look it up for you, but he would probably know it off the top of his head. And so I'm always kind of propping his expertise in the home, so he doesn't have to wrest with gripped knuckles any kind of authority out of me. Do you know what I'm saying? So we don't power, he and I actually power struggle the least out of all of my kids, but I do a very intentional job of deferring to him whenever I know he has a plethora of information about a particular subject. And even math, like sometimes the younger kids are working on something and he's already mastered that because he's a couple years ahead of them. I'll just say, Hezekiah, will you help me with that and go draw it on the board, and we'll teach it together, and that's giving him a chance to share and be that expert in our little school here. So,
I just to
mhm,
add, I don't think they need to, like, I've never, I mean, personally, and the other 1-3s I know, I don't get a sense of them wanting to be the knower. Like,
no.
I'm the knower, I'm the expert. Like, mostly, if they've been raised with in a high quality education, they are going to be asking better questions. They're going to be curious. They're going to, why do you think that? Like, oh, I've never thought. They're going to be open to many possibilities rather than coveting a uh,
Right.
sort of, I know things. I'm the knower. And when I think of authority, I think of somebody who is secure in a depth of, like, they've got, and actually, the more secure you are, the less you give a damn about whether people
Hmm.
or not, because it's, you don't care. You're just like, this is what I know. It becomes, maybe there's about, we could have low expression and high expression. Maybe the mastery expression is to be in a place where you can explore multiple ideas without attachment to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I guess what I was as you were talking about the the dynamic of the 1-3, I was kind of comparing and contrasting in my head some of his experiences with other teachers versus his
Mhm.
experience with me, or teachers that are willing to embrace a lot of those questions. And I'm not, maybe I'm misreading the dynamic, but sometimes it feels like they're taking the questions as a challenge to their authority. And so my statement was more not so much about the child, the 1-3 trying to wrest
Oh, I see. I see.
authority as like some sort of I don't know, ego hunger or whatever, but more that it will feel like a power struggle if you try to how do I say that? If the teacher or the parent
Yeah.
is shutting down questions, then it will start to feel like a power struggle. But I think it's, and I really think without understanding it, it'll look that way on the surface. But if you get underneath, the real issue is they're just wanting to be seen and recognized as an authority in that particular subject. I can think of a time when when I don't want to embarrass my father-in-law, so I'm going to say this with a if you end up listening to this episode, I just want you to know it was a very beautiful example of learning from each other. But we were on a vacation together, and my father-in-law was insisting that this thing in nature was something, and it was not that thing, and my son knew it. And he So he was looking to me and my husband, his dad, to see how do I handle this. There's a person I respect very much that is saying the wrong thing. He was probably like 6, so he didn't have the emotional intelligence to just be like, it's okay if other people are wrong, you know. Like you said, that's really important for a 1-3 to be able to just, I mean, you can, that confidence that comes from like, I know, but I don't have to correct everybody. But he
Yeah,
was really distraught on that vacation because he knew, and the closer we got to the thing, the more he just wanted to say, you're wrong. And so he kept, but what he kept saying is, well, let's get closer and check it out. So he just
nice.
really embraced that adventurous spirit. But let's just get closer, and you might be right, Grandpa, but let's just get closer and check it out. I think it's this, you think it's that. Let's just get closer and check it out. And I was so proud of him because he was doing everything he could to not display any disrespect. And yet
Mhm.
he was not budging that he was right. And he did that to a foreign language teacher not too long ago too, where she was pronouncing something he knew was wrong. And instead of correcting her, he just refused to pronounce it her way. And I finally intervened and I said, I'm sorry he keeps not taking your coaching, but we've been taught how to pronounce this a different way. And she went and researched it and found out he was right. So but it was a really respectful way of saying, I don't think you're right. It was just like kind of holding your own instead of saying you're wrong. He's just like, not sure about that. I'm going to pronounce it this way. So I would like to ask you, because again, this anarchy thing, it gets a little bit of a bad rap because of the word. We have so much like meaning we assign to that. So tell me, can you just illustrate a situation where you masterfully maybe challenged, and we're doing that right now by challenging the educational paradigm, but like a maybe from when you were younger, a time when you really felt like had to challenge the status quo in order to make the room for that innovation to actually happen because you did know what you were talking about. Sorry to put you on the spot. Actually, you know what? You don't have to answer that question because go ahead.
I can't think of a time like this. I have to wait and see if something comes in. But I can tell you a time where I have walked away, like where I've actually put my own life on the line because something's been wrong. And I did that in education, where there were some leaders had come into the school. I'd been at the school for 7 years, and the school and it wasn't working for me anymore. It just wasn't working, and there was cheating going on. There was all sorts of things going on, and I could no longer be part of the thing. So I left and I walked away. And so I left, I left my job without another job. But I had to take a stand and challenge I could no longer go along with it. And that is the third line, breaking the bond, the anarchy coming out. But where the anarchy came out was there was a lot going on, a lot of politics, and they had been ultimately bullying members of staff. And they bullied a colleague of mine, and by this point I was actually being paid £15,000 to tutor a kid 1-to-1 anyway, and the stroke of luck. Well, actually, no, my expertise. I was.
It wasn't a stroke of luck at all. You're right. You were totally
Yeah,
prepared for that, and the
but
universe
that was the thing though. But look at that.
brought it to you.
I was getting paid a very low wage, working 70, 80 hours a week, giving my all to exhaustion, overworked, underpaid. And when I did break that bond and I walked into something better, something that actually was for my soul. So, and again, but I was in Turkey and I wrote an email breaking like such an eloquent, really well articulated email about the highlighting and illuminating all of the skullduggery, all of the things that had been going on. And I sent it to the whole school. And that, I don't know what the mutative outcome of that. Maybe they all said she's a nut job. Who knows? But that was an example of the third line. Yeah, I know change will have come from it. I don't know what changed because I wasn't there to see it.
Right.
Maybe people left. Maybe people felt, actually there's, I'm not, who knows?
Yep.
Let me think. I mean, and to answer your question, was there a time where I masterly challenged? Yeah, I mean, there's been loads of times where I've stood up for something. Maybe this is a simple one. I mean, it's not that great an example, but where my phone, I disputed with a company over a situation where I bought a phone. They weren't going to give me a new one. The phone had broken, and so there's this pattern of actually challenging, going and getting that, this is the researcher, right? Well, this is what the legislation says, this is what the thing says, and
Yeah.
challenging in that way. I don't know if that's a good example. If
No,
I find an example, I'll try and share it.
I actually think your educational, both of them are great examples in completely different ways. And again, it just because you weren't there to see the result of the mutation, you mutated for sure. You evolved. But I'm confident. I mean, just from knowing you and this energy, I'm confident somebody was changed. Like you said, you just weren't around to see necessarily what happened. And like you said, walking away isn't failure. I mean, for for anybody, but especially for a 1-3, that the walking away or changing your mind, that means I have enough data, I have enough evidence to say that my work here is no longer needed and I'm ready to move on to something else. That's okay. It's not failure at all. And I agree that, maybe there's some societal pressure that, I don't know, that we could do a whole episode about conditioning and what people expect of us and all that stuff. But if you're really genuine to the 1-3 energy, and I know you are, that authenticity, then breaking a bond when it's no longer serving you or the higher purpose or the other person. I mean, like there's three purposes here: my soul, the higher purpose, and the other person's soul. When it's clear that none of those objectives are being met anymore, it is healthy to move on. It's very healthy. And sometimes the way we say goodbye in relationships like that is really the testament to our emotional intelligence. Like that's the lesson that we're learning at that moment. But you've already done all of the foundational research, the data points to find that that's the decision that needs to be made. Now I celebrate it, totally celebrate it. And I'm actually glad we talked about it because again, I'm really happy that we're modeling for the parents. Like that's how you reframe failure. It isn't that they quit their job, because that's what, if I was your mom and you quit your job, that's what I'd want to talk to you about. Like, you just quit your job, but it isn't our job to worry. It's our job to say, oh, I bet you had a really good reason for that. You want to talk about it? Knowing you had a long list of reasons for that. I bet you're really frustrated. And would you like to talk about it? And then helping them reframe, oh, wow, I'm glad you trusted your instincts on that. I'm glad, and what's your plan? You had a plan. What's your plan to do next? Like they always have, I think my 1-3 son always has a plan. I'm not always on board with his plan, but he always has one. So, but yeah, what's your plan next? And really just like, yeah, not, yeah, I think if there's one takeaway for all educators and all parents is like, just change your relationship with the word failure. And that will do so much for these kids, because they really do need to sometimes just even fall on their face and to learn something. They really, really do. I, um, I love there's a new series called Zoe and Sassafras in the States. And this girl like the protagonist in this book is constantly trying stuff out, and it often does not work out. And it's just such a great way to visualize, to like see yourself in a story where it's okay to completely just try something and see what happens and get data from it. So and I guess they're never going, like, also encouraging parents, they will never, you guys are never going to grow out of that third line need to try things out.
Yeah.
So what, I guess, we're at the end of our time. Do you have some closing thoughts? I feel like we maybe didn't touch on everything that we had planned on talking about today. What were your closing thoughts about
Yeah, I
1-3
think
energy?
I think we've got everything. I think the key is to help prepare them to build a life of self sustenance, to be self sufficient. The 1-3 really will need to thrive on having financial stability, having a spacious life that's free for them to follow their passions, follow their curiosities, have the space to learn, and that's it. And that's really it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, really making space and helping them to find a way to make space and time for their curiosities and their a lifestyle of learning, a lifelong learning pattern, right?
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. Thank you so much for putting yourself on the spot to be the resident 1-3. And I'm so glad to be doing this series with you. If you want, for those that are watching or listening, if you want to get a hold of us, we're both on Instagram. Um, our handles will be in the show notes, but it's at the HD Biz Blueprint on Instagram for Jessica Ann, and mine's at Sasha1, and I won't bother spelling it because you can just find it in the show notes. So thank you for joining us, and please reach out. We are very responsive in the DMs if you have any questions about 1-3 for yourself or for a child you're working with or a student you're working with. And especially, yeah, if you have questions about how to handle good dialectic questions and how to harness that energy in the classroom, we would love to talk about that more. We both have a plethora of experience with um, harnessing that educational model and Socratic questioning and stuff like that. So yeah, reach out to us. We would love your questions. And then also we're going to be working on recording the 2-4, I think, and the 4-6. And anyway, the other profiles in the future. So if you have specific questions about other profiles we haven't covered yet, please also reach out to us with questions about that. We will consider your questions when we're preparing for those episodes. So thank you. And we'll see you soon on the next one, our next our next episode. I can't talk all of a sudden. Bye.
Bye.